Hey, LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 6 o'clock, the government is to press ahead with plans to make every adult in the UK have a digital ID. The so-called Brit card would be subject to consultation and is being looked at as part of efforts to tackle illegal immigration. Keir Starmer is expected to announce plans tomorrow. Silky Carlo is from Big Brother Watch and has told LBC the idea is completely un-British.
It strikes me that this is a vision for Britain as a checkpoint society that Starmer has absolutely no mandate for, and that I think the population will reject.
The taxi driver who dropped off the Southport killer Axel Rudakabana says he regrets not calling the police sooner. Gary Poland has told an inquiry that he drove off in a panic and made the call 50 minutes later. A cabinet minister has dismissed suggestions of a Labour leadership challenge as speculation and chatter. The Scottish Secretary Douglas Alexander's comments follow Andy Burnham's repeated hints that he could be considering a return to Westminster. And Jaguar Land Rover says it's got some of its IT systems back online after being hit by a cyber attack. The car maker has suspended production for more than a month after the breach at the end of August. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed down 36 points at 92.13. The pound buys $1.33 and €1.14. LBC weather dry and settled with clear spells for many tonight, some patchy fog in the north, a low of 1. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Dominic Ellis.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. It's 6 p.m. Now, Tonight with Andrew Marr.
Good evening. Two really big things happening today which will affect almost all of you. At long last, you're going to get a digital ID card we all have to use. In the fight against illegal migration and crime and the black economy, this is an essential thing. And Britain has been, frankly, archaic in not having it before. Second thing, a new scheme to dole out large chunks of money to depressed and struggling towns and communities around the UK. The Tories called this levelling up, but it never quite worked because there was never quite enough money. It might well be the same this time. But it all shows, doesn't it, that this government is still alive, it's still trying to change things, even as Keir Starmer heads for what will be a pretty miserable Labour conference in Liverpool. Why miserable? Because everywhere you look all around, everything is going badly. Angela Rayner and stamp duty, Peter Mandelson and Jeffrey Epstein, a northern rebellion against the Prime Minister, staff scarpering from Downing Street with the Prime Minister's personal communications director, Steph Driver, leaving tonight, and terrible opinion polls. But here's the thing. I've been reporting on British politics since the early 1980s, and these are the kind of bad things that happen a lot of the time. Downing Street has been mostly chaotic. We've never really liked whichever government's in charge. Rumoured rebellion against the Prime Minister has been a constant from the Thatcher years through Major and Blair and Brown and all those Tories too. Cabinet ministers are always doing stupid things and resigning or being fired. But nothing is irrecoverable. The big picture is that we don't have enough money for good public services. Our economy is too small and not enough of us are working. Find ways to sort that out, and I don't pretend it's easy, and this government could yet stagger on and recover. The rebel right and the rebel left are both making bad mistakes just now. If the Labour Party doesn't decide to destroy itself in government, it has years left to try harder to do better, which, let's be honest, wouldn't be hard. Now, in a moment, we're going to hear about life in Downing Street with Theo Bertram, the former special advisor to both Tony Blair and Gordon Brown and director now of the Social Market Foundation. But first, for the very latest, I'm joined now by LBC's political correspondent, Aggie Chambre. Aggie, great to see you again. Now, the big news really tonight in terms of ordinary life in this country is ID cards. Do we know how they're going to work? Do we know when this is going to happen?
So at this stage, Andrew, we do have kind of scant detail of this. We know the Prime Minister is going to announce this in this set-piece speech tomorrow. We don't know exactly when it's going to be going to happen, but I have been told the government is aiming to have digital ID cards on everybody's phones by the end of the decade. And in terms of what this could actually...
Sorry, just stop there. They'd be on our phones. They wouldn't be like a little bank card that we have to carry. It'd be on the phone.
Well, so Labour Together put out a policy paper a few years ago. Labour Together, of course, a very, very close think tank to Sir Keir Starmer, put out a policy paper basically suggesting that they would be on everybody's phones. It would be part of your kind of wallet app on your mobile phone. And that is how it would work. So, it's been described to me as it would be a very quick sort of, you'd scan it, yes, no, right to work. And that's the key to it, that the government thinks this will make it much easier to stop illegal migration and to stop people being taken advantage of in the labour market.
I mean, there are people that don't have phones, of course. Not many, but there are some. Anyway, when do we think this might happen by?
Well, we think it'll be announced tomorrow. Then there'll be a consultation. Then there'll be the legislation passed through Parliament. I don't imagine that there'll be a problem passing it, although there will be significant opposition to it within Parliament. And then, as I say, they hope to have it on people's phones, if indeed that is the medium they choose to do it on by the end of the decade. Right.
Let's just jump to the little local difficulties tonight in Downing Street, because Steph Driver, a very important figure for Keir Starmer, is now going as well. Just reminds, this is quite an exodus happening now, isn't it?
It's quite an exodus, and it just seems to keep on coming. So, Andrew, if I could just remind you very briefly of some of the people that this number 10 has already lost. Simon Case, the Cabinet Secretary, Matthew Doyle, the first Director of Comms, James Lyons, the second Director of Comms, Liz Lloyd, the Director of Policy, Olaf Henriksen Bell, the Director of Number 10 Policy Unit, the Principal Private Secretary to the Prime Minister, Nim Pandit. She actually hasn't left Number 10, but she was moved after quite a scathing briefing to the BBC. Sue Gray, you'll remember her, the Chief of Staff.
I remember Sue Gray, yes.
Tom Webb, Policy Advisor, Nick Williams, Policy Advisor, and the list honestly does go on. And it's just worth reminding you at this stage, they have only been in power just over a year.
Absolutely astonishing. What an exodus. Aggie, thank you very much. So now to Theo Bertram, advisor to both Prime Ministers Blair and Brown. We spoke a little bit earlier about the loss of Steph Driver. How bad is this, I asked, for Starmer, to lose somebody who has been by his side for almost 6 years?
I think that's a big loss, and she's been very close to the leadership and is obviously a really important character in his inner circle. And I think it's really important for the Prime Minister to have people who he trusts and people who really know him around him.
There's been a steady stream of people leaving Downing Street in the last few weeks, sometimes voluntarily, sometimes not. What does that say about Keir Starmer's handling of people? It seems almost as if he finds it very hard to keep people close to him for long.
I think being a number 10 is tough, and I think it's difficult to be an advisor. You're under a lot of pressure, and so I think it's not super surprising or shocking that people would leave, but I think I can't remember under either Blair or Brown, while there was a lot of turnover, what I can't remember is people leaving because they didn't like it. It's a job that's incredible privilege to have, and inevitably people trip over things and you have to let people go. But I don't remember people leaving because they didn't like the place. And there were pretty tough times to work in there under Gordon Brown, but people didn't leave because they didn't like it. So I would be worried about that if I was number 10, that there's not that people don't want to stay.
Very few people listening to this programme will know who Steph Driver is or have come across her at all. Can we just talk a little bit about Steph? Because she seemed to me to be one of the sort of warmer, more normal, human, genial faces around Keir Starmer, someone who was very easy to talk to.
One of the things that you say when you're in number 10, when you're speaking to other secretaries of state and trying to get them to do the right thing on a programme or take the right line, is you say, well, number 10, this is the line from number 10. And in the case of Steph Driver, if people said, this is a line from number 10, this is a line from Steph, that meant the same thing. That was probably, she had a good idea of what the Prime Minister's view on this is. Now, the problem comes in number 10 is if you say, well, the number 10 line is this, and the Cabinet Minister says, yes, but what does Keir think? Is that different to what you're saying? And then things get much harder to manage. And I think that thing of who knows the mind of Keir and who can represent him with the other secretaries of state, I think that is key. And she was one of those few people that could claim to have that and have that authority, and so would be listened to.
I think she was certainly somebody who understood Keir Starmer's mind and could be listened to in that regard. But it does seem that she, with her departure, there's almost nobody left apart from Morgan McSweeney himself. The shield wall is pretty small.
I think there's still a lot of people that, the Labour Party a lot of people who work for the Labour Party have worked around the Labour Party for a long time. So a lot of them know each other. And, I think they're committed there to the cause. And I know some of the people who've gone in, and I know that they will be, they've been around the Labour Party for a long time. But that's not quite the same as knowing the boss himself. And that does take time. But both Tony was in there a very long time, so he would go through quite a change over time, and there were sort of different teams that came in. Gordon did a big turnaround in his team after about a year or so, after sort of things started to fall apart. Some of that went sort of disastrously, but some of it went pretty well. So that sort of idea of changing advisors is not without precedent. But I think it's crucial to have some of those key lieutenants who know you really well, and there are fewer of those now than there were.
Fewer and fewer as Sir Keir heads up to Liverpool. Theo Bertram, thank you very much indeed. Now, whatever you think of them as individuals, Keir Starmer and Andy Burnham have very different views about this country right now. Prime Minister insists we are not broken, but Burnham says we're facing an existential threat and need to return to much wider public control. This is almost a difference of urgency. Let's talk now to Oliver Coppard, the Mayor of South Yorkshire, who's worked closely with Andy Burnham. Oliver, thank you very much indeed for joining me. Now, if you were able to click your fingers and replace Keir Starmer with Andy Burnham right now, would that be a good thing for the Labour Party and a good thing for the country?
No, look, I definitely don't think it would be a good thing for devolution and for mayors in this country and for the way in which this country is being rebalanced through devolution. Andy Burnham's been a brilliant mayor. He's been absolutely brilliant at making the case for devolution for the North.
And so you'd like him to stick with Manchester and stick with the job he's doing?
I think he's doing a brilliant job, and I want to see him continue to be the mayor of Greater Manchester for years to come, because he's somebody I like working with, who I know gets things done, who can get attention for the cause of devolution, and has fought the fight, good fight, on getting more money, more powers, more control up into the north, and that's what I want to do alongside Andy and all the other mayors, and it couldn't be more important at this moment in time, more than ever.
There's no doubt, maybe it's all media-driven, maybe it's not, that there is a great kind of kerfuffle or hoo-ha going on at the moment about a possible leadership challenge by Andy to Keir Starmer. It looks like it might overshadow the Labour conference a bit. If it happened, it would then dominate the government, dominate all political conversation for a long time. Would that be kind of disastrous, in your view, for the Labour government?
I think the whole thing is a bit of a nonsense, if I'm perfectly honest. Andy has never said, look, I'm taking on Keir. I'm going to go and try and be the Prime Minister. He's absolutely put out into the world what his ideas are, what he's thinking about, how we need to change as a party. But that's what big political figures do, isn't it? They share ideas. They confront others who don't have the same ideas, and they try and win the argument. And I don't think that's an unreasonable thing for Andy to be doing. More importantly, though, the conference is going to be dominated, I think, by big ideas about policy, about what we're doing, how we're going to get back on track as a government, and that's what I want to hear from the government over the course of the next few days in Liverpool.
Well, you call Andy a big political figure, and that's certainly right. And he seems to bring a slightly different view on economics and a kind of bouncy optimism we don't see very much of in London at the moment, the kind of Manchester bounce. What about the economic argument that's going to be going? Because perhaps not enough devolution, perhaps not enough public investment has been the problem.
I've never heard bouncy optimism as a way to describe Andy Burnham before, but it sounds about right to me. Look, I think there is a conversation to be had about the pace and scale of change when it comes to devolution. People like me, people like Andy have been calling, I think, for greater devolution when it comes to health, when it comes to education. You saw a report from Labour Together just a few days ago, endorsed by Steve Reid, the new Secretary of State for MHCLG. That's good, I think. The white paper is making its way through Parliament now in terms of what we're going to get for mayors in terms of devolution, powers control, and all the rest of it. That we'll sort of see that unfold over the next few months. But what seems clear is, in my case in South Yorkshire, if you look at places like Rotherham, if you look at places like Sheffield, the growth that we're seeing in those places, 64% growth in Rotherham over the last 20 years alone, faster than anywhere else in the country, a lot of that is down to devolution, down to greater control, down to the decisions we can take in place. And I think a Labour government pushing forward with that agenda, as they have promised to do, is incredibly important when you think about not just rebalancing the country, but growing the economy more broadly.
Oliver Coppard, voice of South Yorkshire, thank you very much indeed. So how does all of this seem from the viewpoint of Labour MPs in the north? Graham Stringer, the MP for Blakely and Middleton South, was wrongly rumoured to be prepared to give up his seat to allow Bertram back into Westminster. He joins me now. Graham, very good to see you. In your view, is the talk of a leadership challenge overcooked, hysterical, overexcited, or is there something going on?
I think there's something going on. I think Andy shouldn't be playing footsie with the Labour Party. I mean, I think he should either make his intention clear that he would like to be the next Labour Prime Minister and say so, and then put out his agenda. I think one of the reasons there is discussion is that this government hasn't been as successful as I would wish it and many other people would wish it to be. And the Prime Minister appears not to have a grip on either communicating his philosophy behind the decisions that are made, or there is no clarity about where the government is going, and which is it's not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons why we're so low in the opinion polls. And I think the view of most Labour MPs in private is that something has to change. And if we have the routing that seems likely in the next local elections and in Wales, then I think Labour MPs will start looking at the rule book, start looking at who is available to stand for leader of the Labour Party, and there will be serious discussions. But my view is that Keir should be given those 7 months to improve his performance.
That's fascinating. So if you do badly in those elections and things haven't improved, there should at that point be a change of leader, change of Prime Minister.
What I'm saying is there will undoubtedly be a discussion about it. Changing leaders is about alternatives. You have to have the right person, somebody whose policies people feel they can follow. I made the case before Gordon Brown became leader that there should be a challenge to him. There shouldn't have been a coronation, because I thought that debate would be helpful. But myself, Charles Clarke, and many others believe there should be a challenge to Gordon Brown, but there was nobody available.
To do it.
So,
if it wasn't Andy Burnham, who would you think should be in the running?
I don't know that I can answer that. I mean, I read the newspapers like everybody else. I know most of the Labour MPs who've been there for more than the last general election, for the last 5 or 6 years. Wes Streeting is talked about. He's a very good communicator. He's tackling one of the toughest jobs in Parliament. Shabana Mahmood, I am very hopeful she will get a grip on migration in the Home Office. But there are other people.
Yeah.
And there is time. And I didn't really want to mention those names, but it's not as though they're a secret. And there are some people who may not have made it clear, who have views and competencies that haven't so far been assessed.
I think that's absolutely right. But just finally, to be absolutely clear, your phone goes behind you. Andy Burnham's on the phone. He says, Graham, would you mind stepping down from your seat to let me back into the House of Commons? He doesn't get a warm yes.
He would get a very firm no. And I would say to him, I know Andy quite well, I gave a commitment to the people who voted for me at the last general election. I asked them to vote for me, and they will have assumed that was for the whole period of this Parliament, quite reasonably. And I would say the same to Andy. You've been a really good mayor. You've got a national profile. You're doing a good job for Manchester and indeed the whole of the north of England. Don't let people down. And you say that you want to defeat reform. Good. If you leave a vacancy as the mayor of Greater Manchester, it might be an opportunity for reform that none of us would welcome fighting that election.
A very, very interesting point there. Graham Stringer, thank you very much indeed for talking to LBC tonight. Up next, we're going to look at the other big policy announcement from the government today as they struggle to win back disappointed voters. This is Labour's version of levelling up. You're listening to Tonight with Andrew Marr. The time now is 6:20.
Weekdays from 7 a.m.
Why this staggering level of incompetence?
Straight to the point.
This is the economics of the madhouse from this government.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
But she does seem to struggle with her sums.
Listen on Global Player or the new LBC app. Download it now from your app store. LBC. Tonight with Andrew Marr. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
6:22. Today's big initiative from the government aims to cheer up more than 330 overlooked communities around the UK with shabby high streets by doling out money from a new fund to be known as the Pride in Place Fund. At the same time, councils will get new powers to block vape shops and barber shops they don't want at the heart of their communities. It all sounds quite like the thinking around the Tory Levelling Up programme, which never quite got going. One of those involved in that, and still a campaigner for higher public investment, is the former chief economist to the Bank of England, Andy Haldane. What, I wondered, did he think about the measures announced today, and how did they compare to the Conservative Levelling Up agenda?
Sounds familiar, does it not? Extra money to towns around the country. You know, what was
dilapidated high streets, all of that.
Exactly. Hanging basket initiatives galore. Yeah. Now, I'm not against hanging baskets, not against initiatives that help improve the public realm in the dilapidated parts, of which there are rather too many. I think there's extra money, maybe. I think there's fewer strings. Those are both positives. But is this the full-throated, wholehearted approach to giving power to local leaders? It looks more like another fund for local nice things.
From the centre. Have a bit of this, have a bit of that.
Exactly, another fund.
Now, you have argued really for two things at the same time. More public investment. We need to improve public structures of all kinds, transport and the rest of it. But also it has to be controlled not from Whitehall, but from communities around the country. I think you've been working particularly in the East Midlands recently. Yeah. Just explain what your vision is.
Well, on the second of those, Andrew, it's not a new point. I think we are still by some margin the most centralised country in the Western world. Even with the Devo bill going through, that'll still be true. would be mealy-mouthed about spending powers and even more mealy-mouthed about taxation powers. Local areas raising their own monies. Mm-hmm. And that puts a natural brake on the capacity to do the things we know that they need, whether it's building houses or power stations or whatever it might be. So part of this is about powers, but part of it too is about us making a much more comprehensive effort to close what could easily be a £2 trillion capital investment gap across the UK, where the gaps are largest in the poorest parts of the country. So it's double-pronged, powers here, money's there, neither being approached with a requisite degree of seriousness, I would say.
Now, if there is a conversation going on between Keir Starmer on the one hand and Andy Burnham on the other, you sound much more like Andy Burnham, who has been saying again and again and again, we need more powers in Manchester. Look at what I'm doing with the powers we've got. Look at the local publicly owned bus services and the rest of it. So in the sense, to the extent there is an argument going on inside the Labour Party, you would be on the Burnham side of that.
Yes, I think there is no way, Andrew, this government or any government will make good on its national growth mission unless and until every corner of the UK is growing and growing gangbusters. And that will not happen unless and until local leaders are fully empowered. And to be fair, even for Keir right now. Now, it's quite a nice job being mayor at the moment. You have powers over spending, which are popular, and no powers over taxation, which are unpopular. Unsurprising, mayors are pretty popular right now. So this might work even politically for Keir to rebalance the scales between powers on the one hand and accountabilities on the other.
Andy Burnham says another couple of very interesting things about the economy. First of all, he said we need much more public ownership. We actually need to get into the hands of politicians some of the big powers in the country. We have to roll back the 1980s, as he said. Do you agree with that?
Elements of. So I think where it's something that is plainly a public utility, there needs to be a debate about whether nationalisation is the right route to ensure those utilities are provided in the right quantity, at the right price, and at the right quality that the public demands.
But shareholders shouldn't be putting money in their pockets out of water, for instance.
No, quite so. And that the flip of that has been far too little of those monies have flowed into the investment that the water industry and others have needed to keep prices low and to improve quality, both of which have been miserable.
And the other thing that he says, which goes absolutely to your old job at the Bank of England, in a sense, is we should stop being worried about the bond markets. We should stop flinching every time the bond markets glare at us. You know, let's be bolder about that. Is that realistic?
Well, I mean, the bond markets are fragile and febrile, I'd say, right now, not just in the UK, but globally. Mm-hmm. So I would not be one that would say we can to hell with it. Mm-hmm. What I would say, though, is the international experience is that it's not about borrowing per se. Mm-hmm. It's the use to which you put that borrowing. Mm-hmm. If that is put towards a sort of public investment by which we started this conversation to grow opportunity in local areas, I think, and the evidence suggests internationally, bond markets would think that could be taken in their stride. It's a story that accompanies the borrowing as much as its quantum that matters.
But if it goes to higher and higher welfare bills, you're in trouble.
Yes. If this is money that doesn't plausibly yield a return in the form of higher growth and higher tax revenues down the line, then you're in deep problems. That's why the story that accompanies this and the use to which it's put is key.
The more I talk to you, Andy, the more I think the alternative economic strategy or policy being advocated by Andy Burnham at the moment isn't a bad one.
I think, without question, we need a pretty significant, Andrew, reset in all the key contours of economic and social policy if we are to get growth going. And that includes the powers that are vested locally as well as nationally.
We need the Manchester vision more than the London one at the moment.
Well, the thing that the Manchester vision has on its favour is that it isn't just a vision. It has been a lived reality for the last 20 or 30 years. The foundations of that were set before Andy turned up, actually, in the form of Howard Bernstein and Richard Leese. But unless Andy's gone and taken that to the next level, It's a rare example of local success, now sucking in talent. Manchester's a net importer of graduates now, a significant net importer of foreign capital. It can be done locally. Let's perhaps take that playbook and use it nationally.
I very, very much hope that members of the Cabinet and other Labour MPs are listening to this conversation and thinking about it deeply. Andy Haldane, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you, Andrew.
Now then, if there's one policy which could cheer up Labour members at their conference like no other, it would be lifting the benefit cap for families with more than 2 children. That would be expensive, but experts say it is the single best way to eradicate child poverty. George Icke, LBC's Midlands reporter, has this.
Where am I going to find it, or what can I cut down on? You know, can I skip shopping for a week? You know, do I need to go to a food bank? There was times where I've had to say to my partner, I think we're going to have to do it.
This is Kimberly, a mother of 2 living in Birmingham who's struggling to make ends meet. And what is your hope for the future?
It's a hope that instead of parents having to live, you know, on benefits, live hand to mouth, there's a time where I'm hoping that stops and they take a step back and realise that we need more support, we need it.
The latest figures from the End Child Poverty Coalition says 36% of children in the West Midlands are currently living in poverty. That means as the new school year gets underway, in the average class of 30 children, 11 of them would be living below the poverty line. The government's facing real pressure to bring forward radical measures in its upcoming child poverty strategy, both from its own backbenchers and the new far-left Corbyn movement. One of the key changes being mooted is the scrapping of the 2-child benefit cap, something Nigel Farage's Reform Party are calling for. But Donna Prescott, a manager at this home start in Birmingham, where struggling families can get help, says this move alone isn't ambitious enough.
You know, it's an extra £17 a week. You know, an extra £17 a week isn't going to bring a family out of poverty.
If you weren't speaking to me, but speaking to a member of the government or someone with real power, what would you say to them to make them understand what you're seeing on the ground? What would you tell them needs to be done differently?
We're seeing so many children at the moment that are starting school that aren't potty trained, you know, they can't hold a pencil. So we work a lot with children and do a lot of preschool readiness, but there does need to be more investment from sort of higher up so that the children are having those opportunities rather than services being cut.
And for some Labour voters in Birmingham, the issue's becoming a question about the Labour Party's identity.
They're not traditionally what Labour were meant to be back from after the Second World War. You know, Labour was a different thing than what it is today.
They backed on the welfare bill, which I think was wrong.
I think they need to go, and I think everything needs to be rethought. I think it's very sad that they're not thinking of people, working people, who work hard.
Children's Commissioner Dame Rachel de Souza told LBC how entrenched child poverty levels are impacting the lives of children in communities across the country, including here in the Midlands.
Kids were talking to me again about housing problems, mouldy homes, nowhere to play. So not being able to get out, and there's syringes everywhere. They can't walk. You know, just walking home from school means like a 90-minute walk through parks full of criminals. That's how children experience poverty. So I think for me, the housing issues, particularly in parts of the West Mids and in our big cities, and how children are experiencing poverty, really is getting worse and really is quite shocking.
The government points to the introduction of free school meals and helping families out of poverty by reforming the welfare system and getting people back into meaningful work. But the pressure on Keir Starmer is clear. If the soon-to-be-published child poverty strategy lacks bold action, he faces pressure from both within his party and the challenger parties on the left and the right.
LBC's George Icke there. Up next, I'm going to be joined by the best-selling author of The Escape Artist, whose latest book, Traitors Circle, looks at all the Germans who resisted Hitler's fascism. Did he see any parallels with today's world? Time now, 6:34, and Dominic Ellis has your news headlines.
Every adult in the UK could be required to have a mandatory digital ID as part of plans to tackle illegal immigration. The Prime Minister is expected to announce further details on the so-called Brit card tomorrow. A senior Labour MP has told Tonight with Andrew Marr that Andy Burnham needs to make his intentions clear and shouldn't be playing footsie with the party. Graham Stringer's comments follow after the Greater Manchester Mayor revealed that MPs are urging him to challenge Sir Keir Starmer for the leadership. And Jaguar Land Rover says it's got some of its IT systems back online after being hit by a cyber attack. The car maker has suspended production for more than a month after the breach at the end of August. LBC weather dry and settled for many tonight with clear spells, some patchy fog in places, a low of 1.
This is LBC.
Play.
Tonight with Andrew Marr on LBC.
6:36. Now, these days we throw around words like fascist and Nazi, perhaps a bit too easily, forgetting what life was like when the real ones were in charge. A page-turning new real-life account of Germans who resisted Hitler, The Traitors Circle by Jonathan Freedland, is a chilling reminder. He joined me earlier, and I began by asking him about the resistors. They weren't the cliched left-wing workers, but came from the top end of German society.
Not at all. This is a group drawn from German high society, from the elite. There are two countesses in this book, not just one. There's an ambassador's widow. These are people from either the aristocracy or the upper reaches of previously the German governing classes. So there are former treasury mandarins, diplomats. This is a world of white tie dinners and embassy balls and nights at the opera. These were, which to me, first of all, was unexpected, but also in some ways added to the drama of it. These were people who really could have lived a very good and comfortable life had they not stepped out of line.
And of course, stepping out of line is not Jimmy Kimmel, this. It's much, much more dangerous if you do. And you have a German ambassador in New York who goes to a dinner for Jews for Albert Einstein, and he's hauled back and given a dressing down by none other than Adolf Hitler himself. So they're working at the top level the whole time, these people.
They are, and their case, as it were, does reach the top level. You know, it's discussed by Himmler, by Hitler. These are people who are from the absolute inner circle in Germany, and what they did counted. And what they did was to sit together in private at a tea party in September 1943. They thought they were among their own, among kindred spirits. And what they did not know was that sitting around the table with them was somebody who was about to betray all the rest to the Gestapo. So it was that dramatic setup in a way that drew me to this story, because I wanted to see if I could paste this and write this like a whodunit. But actually the moment of treachery would be hugely grave for everybody involved, with very, well, I was going to say fateful, but also fatal consequences.
A lot of them end up hanging from meat hooks or indeed being decapitated.
Yeah, the penalty for treason in the Germany of Adolf Hitler was the death penalty, and some, not all, of the people who would gather for that tea party that day would find that out very, very directly.
And these are people who've not only been hiding Jews in their own homes, but they've also been in touch with a kind of group of Germans in exile in Switzerland who thought of themselves as a possible future German government when Hitler fell.
Yeah, that was particularly the allegation that was made about them. In fact, the contacts were pretty sketchy, but it was quite true that a former chancellor of Germany was in Switzerland. There was a Christian leader, a peace campaigner. There were people outside, patriotic Germans outside the country who were praying for the day when Hitler's regime would be toppled. And these were people in this aristocratic circle who themselves hoped for that day. And just the act of talking about that, of planning for it, would count as an act against the regime. So what I saw in this group was the real range of responses. There are some people who are at the, if you like, the kinetic end, who are within touching distance of plots to kill Adolf Hitler. But there are other people whose resistance takes the form, as you mentioned, of harbouring Jews, hiding them in their own home at huge mortal risk. Others who are trying to get papers, if necessary, forged papers that would enable them to leave the country. And then others who are just trying to do whatever they can, sometimes really quite symbolically. And you mentioned the diplomat, the man who used to be consul general in New York. He gets hold of information and just finds the act of remembering that information and passing it on feels like an act of resistance. He says to his wife, when the whole world is lying, someone has to tell the truth.
I thought in the end, your theme in this book, Jonathan, was about the nature of courage, because we are very familiar with battlefield courage, people charging trenches and all the rest of it. But these are people whose courage takes the form of living with fatal secrets, in danger, every minute of every hour of every day for years. That seems to be a higher kind of courage, frankly.
I would agree. And I think that it's less dramatic, it's less glamorous. But what I saw in this story was that there are people who, for example, do not have, superhero, lantern-jawed action courage. Rather, they are people who had great fear, great anxiety. They were living in this time of tremendous paranoia when neighbours were watching neighbours, family members were spying on family members. And yet they overcame their own anxieties and fears, and often in gestures small, but nevertheless required great courage. So I'm very attached to one of the two countesses, Aggie, her name was, who made it a habit when out in the streets of Berlin to carry 2 bags heavy with shopping. Why did she do that? So that if somebody stopped her in the street, she would not be able to reciprocate the Heil Hitler salute. Her hands would be full, and I can picture her sort of shrugging apologetically. She was somebody who was racked by anxiety and nerves, but she overcame it, and she would get food to Jews in hiding and so on. That, to me, is as courageous as our traditional image of the resistance fighter planting a bomb on the railway line in occupied Paris and so on. These people had to do everything they could in a system that would have rewarded them if they'd done nothing. They took needless risk because there was nothing for them to gain in this story, and yet absolutely everything to lose.
Good German heroes. Johnny, at the start of the book, you say that in your Jewish family, you grew up in a family where you wouldn't buy German cars or German washing machines or German anything. A very, very strongly anti-German atmosphere for very obvious reasons. Is this book, in a sense, meant as an act of kind of reconciliation, an act of acknowledgement of the good Germans who were there all along?
It is, I think, and I did indeed grow up with this edict from my late mother, whose own mother had been killed in the very last V-2 rocket of the Blitz in London, who just wanted no trace of Germany in our home. As you say, no dishwasher, no car in the driveway, because her belief was that every last German was equally guilty, that perhaps there'd been some who resisted, as you referred to earlier, right at the beginning in 1933, communists and socialists, but everyone else fell in line. And it turned out that, yes, there was this group at the Tea Party, but there were, by one Allied investigator's estimate, 3 million Germans who were detained or arrested or jailed for crimes of dissent through the 12 years of the Third Reich. 3 million people. It's not enough. It perhaps is 5% of the population at the time, but it's not nothing.
Not nothing.
And therefore, in a way, I wanted to repair or correct that understanding I'd grown up with, that it was every last German. It wasn't every last German. There were some who stepped out of line at huge cost. And writing in this book, which I hope is a page-turner and a thriller as you try and find out who betrayed this group, but also will be addressing something serious that says in this people, the Germans, who have been marked by history, there were some who were determined to do the right thing.
And very briefly and finally, Jonathan, it struck me reading this book, we throw around in contemporary politics words like fascist and Nazi the whole time. And really we ought to remember, all of us, what it was actually like when the real things were there.
Yes, that's absolutely right. The difference in scale, in degree, in kind is something completely singular about this period. There is obviously no comparison. Nevertheless, things don't have to be identical for us to be able to learn from them. And authoritarian regimes do have certain features in common that recur. And you can see them in Viktor Orban's Hungary or Erdogan's Turkey. And even, you mentioned Jimmy Kimmel, you can see them in Donald
Washington.
Trump's United States. Yeah. And there are some lessons here from that. And one, perhaps above all, that these characters learnt to their cost is if you fear that is the direction of travel, you have to move extremely fast.
A very good lesson to end on. Jonathan Freedland, thank you so much, author of The Traitors Circle. Highly recommended. So, resisting easy comparisons, let's turn to a masterclass in how to troll your political opponents from one Donald Trump in Washington. He has put up a wall of photographs of past presidents, but there is a strange gap. LBC's Washington correspondent Simon Marks is with me to pick up the story.
It is an amazing development, this, Andrew. If you've ever seen pictures of any president of the United States with a foreign leader and they're walking down that colonnade that is actually outside, but it's covered at the White House, and they walk towards the camera. Donald Trump has now lined the walls of the West Colonnade with pictures, portraits of every single president of the United States. But as you wander up towards the Oval Office, you see that after Donald Trump's first portrait, and before his second one, there is a photograph that is a signature of Joe Biden being written by the auto pen machine. The Republicans have been up in arms over the fact that Joe Biden, they discovered, signed several significant documents, including many of the pardons that he issued on the final day of his presidency, using the machine. The president himself did not sign the document, and they've raised questions about his competence and whether he knew
was he really being president at all?
Signing. Yeah. So instead of a portrait of Joe Biden, presidential level trolling, they've put a picture up of the auto pen signing his name.
It's both mean-minded and quite funny, which says it all, I think.
Dispiriting.
A lot of people have said to me, how can it be that Donald Trump's comments about Britain and London and the West were so rude, so recently after he was in the UK being very, very careful and diplomatic in his language with Keir Starmer?
Because he's Donald Trump. Because it was absolutely inevitable. I'm not, Lord knows, I'm not one of the world's great prognosticators, but I said at the time, the minute he leaves the UK with the picture of himself and the king tucked in his breast pocket, he's going to turn. And he turned in that UN speech, and he turned on significant issues. I mean, not the nonsense about the Sharia law, although it underpins a complete failure to understand what this great city is all about, but particularly what he said about clean energy as well, going much further than anything he'd said about North Sea oil when he was sort of vaguely, softly criticising the British government while he was here. This is the beginning of the turn, and it's all downhill for the Prime Minister in terms of Donald Trump from here on out.
Now, a couple of minutes ago, we heard Jonathan Freedland talking about President Erdogan of Turkey, who, of course, today has been in the Oval Office. Is there anything that we can learn from that conversation?
Well, there's a question about one of the things that Donald Trump said to Erdogan when they first sat down. He said of President Erdogan, nobody knows more about rigged elections than him. And you can read that comment in a couple of different ways. Erdogan is there because he really wants two things from President Trump. He wants F-35 fighter jets for Turkey, and he wants the Trump administration to take a much tougher line on Gaza and join him in blaming Benjamin Netanyahu for what the Turkish leader says is a genocide. He might get the former. He's definitely not going to get the latter. The big thing he's going to get is the imprimatur of Donald Trump's respectability for Turkey's strongman.
Really, really interesting, Simon. Thanks very, very much indeed for that. Now then, coming up as the Labour conference looms and the rumours around Andy Burnham's political future swirl about Westminster, I'll be joined by my Thursday political panel to discuss the huge challenges facing the Prime Minister. Time now, 6:49.
Coming up at 7 on LBC, Ian Dale.
Keir Starmer will reportedly skip this year's COP climate summit, having slammed Rishi Sunak for considering doing this in 22. Is he taking climate change seriously enough?
Ian Dale on LBC. This is LBC. Message Andrew Marr on WhatsApp now on 0345 60 60 973.
6:51. Parliament hasn't been sitting this week, but political news didn't seem to notice that and raced ahead in all directions anyway. What mattered most about the week? What should we remember from it? Let's talk now to my political panel, this week comprising the journalist and broadcaster Zoe Grünewald and the Financial Times political editor George Parker. Welcome to you both. Andy Burnham, media hysteria or something more to it?
Well, I think there's obviously something more to it. I mean, he gave an interview to the New Statesman, obviously, and also the Telegraph as well. I think one, you could say he's talking to Labour members. One, it's potentially a pitch to a wider audience. Clearly, it's ruffled some feathers. This is all at a time where Keir Starmer's feeling quite nervous about his position in the party. It's just ahead of Labour conference, and it was a direct challenge to a lot of Keir Starmer's policies, so it can't be dismissed.
George?
No, I agree with that. Although I have to say that people in Downing Street and around Keir Starmer are rubbing their hands in glee at the way that this has gone off, to be honest, because Andy Burnham setting out his economic manifesto, which included this idea that we shouldn't be in hoc to the bond markets anymore, had echoes, I think, of Liz Truss, which is a theme which Keir Starmer picked up in one of his broadcast interviews this afternoon.
It was very, very funny, actually. I noticed one of our colleagues tweeting that line from Downing Street, you know, is Andy Burnham going to be Labour's Liz Truss? And Liz Truss immediately retweeted it, saying, you know, you wish, or words to that effect.
Yes, look, I mean, the thing about saying that you don't really think we should be in hoc to the bond markets, if you want to be less in hoc to the bond markets, you need to borrow less money rather than more. And I was speaking to someone close to Starmer who said it's a bit like saying to someone on a ledge, you don't have to worry about gravity. You know, it's that kind of thing. And I think they're delighted that he's chosen this moment, and the way he's done it, it seems to have galvanised the Parliamentary Labour Party in a way which, frankly, hasn't been behind Starmer for quite a while.
It's going to have a very big but unpredictable effect on the Labour Party conference, I guess.
Yeah, and we have a deputy leadership contest obviously running at the same time. What felt like it was going to be quite a dry, sombre conference is actually likely to be quite sparky, and I think there will be people on manoeuvres. And of course, all of this comes at a time where, for Keir Starmer, we were just talking about this before, what is he going to say in his speech? The country is divided, reform is on the march. It's going to be really interesting to see how he responds.
Prediction, he's going to say we're going to lift the two-child benefit cap for a start, because that's the one thing that can get people up on their feet, I imagine, that he's got. They won't be quite so keen on the ID cards, but we should really talk about that. Huge policy.
A big policy. And Andrew, you remember well Tony Blair's attempt to introduce compulsory ID cards thwarted and really caused a lot of resentment in the Labour Party. It's interesting that Keir Starmer's going to announce this not at the Labour Party conference in front of a load of Labour activists, but at a conference the day before tomorrow, in fact, a progressive conference. So I think he knows this is a policy which will resonate with the public, but will probably still cause a bit of angst amongst some Labour activists. So I think he's going to deliver it. And it's a big moment. You know, this is something which civil libertarians have been worried about for a long time, the idea that you have to show your papers to a policeman and so forth.
I mean, the essence is it makes this country a bit less attractive for migrants. Because you can't go straight into the grey economy or the black economy and send money home.
I think this is the thing. I think there is a pitch to voters who are worried about migration that this might help them get a grip on it. But I think for a lot of voters, when they hear digital ID or ID cards, they'll be thinking, will this make it easier for me to file my taxes? Will it make it easier for me to get my NHS records? Will it make it the user experience better? And we don't know the detail yet, but my suspicion is the answer is no. And therefore, I think you're going to have a bit of a fight on your hands. If you can't show that this is really going to impact migration levels, I think you're going to get quite a bit of opposition.
I should say this is also partly in response to something that President Macron of France said to Keir Starmer. He said, you've got to stop the pull factors. What is it that makes Britain so attractive to these people? One of the things, according to Macron, is your ability to get into the black or grey economy.
And George, dare I say it, those of our kind of vintage have a sort of sentimental thing about this because we grew up seeing films of, we were talking about the Nazis earlier on in the show, sort of, leather-coated guys going through the train saying, "Where's your papers?"
Exactly.
But actually, we give so much of our data to every second supermarket and shop of all kinds. That's gone. That's very out of date.
I think the public have moved on this. They're so used to to using all forms of digital ID, and they probably quite like the idea of simplifying it. But I think there's still parts of the political system, the Liberal Democrats, for example.
They've already come out, haven't they?
I think they've come out and said they don't like the idea of compulsory ID cards. But I think there's a bit of, even within the Liberal Democrats, there's a bit of nervousness about this and a view that maybe they should be on the same side as Keir Starmer.
There were some Liberal Democrats, of course. Norman Lamb, when he was chair of the Science and Technology Committee, was quite in favour of a single unique identifier, I think it was. And that was based on the idea of making public services work better, joining up those systems, because people now expect a lot from their government in the digital age. They want it to work like every other system. And of course, here we've got all the legacy systems in place that make it very, very difficult to do so.
That is the fundamental big question, of course, is the British state actually competent to produce an ID card that isn't easily fraudulent and actually works?
Really?
Yeah, and in Estonia, of course, they do it with blockchain and all sorts. We don't quite have that level of technology inside Whitehall, so it's a bit more difficult.
That's a big question. The other thing is that Tony Blair, of course, has been driving this from outside government, trying to complete his legacy when he was Prime Minister. But he sees this as being a pathway to make government more efficient and save money.
Let me ask you both about the other side of the political spectrum and the Reform Party, because I think, like quite a lot of people, a few weeks ago I thought if the Labour Party stumbled and somehow fell from power, a Reform government is pretty much inevitable now. I think the last week has not been good for Reform, however. This big deportation plan, which was perhaps going too far for the average British voter, even Conservative voters they want to bring in, and then, of course, what Nigel Farage said about eating swans and also paracetamol.
Yes, I think there's a little bit of a misreading of the room going on. I think the problem for Nigel Farage is he has almost two bases. He has former Conservative voters who are disaffected and no longer have the Tories as a home. And then he has the slightly more online, maybe a little bit more easily kind of radicalised base that do circulate a lot in these ecosystems with the US. They share a lot of their information in these digital spaces. And trying to keep both on side, I think, is going to be very difficult because naturally they're just ideologically quite different.
I think at the moment it doesn't feel like this to many people in the Labour Party, but I think in a couple of years' time they might think we were lucky with our enemies. I mean, you sort of start to see glimpses of that, as you say, Andrew. Why is Nigel Farage aligning himself with Donald Trump in this paracetamol debate? Why would you do that? There's nothing to be gained in it.
So here's a really, really radical question. Is this the moment in the political cycle to start to buy Conservative? In other words, is that the next thing that's going to happen, an upswing for the Tories after all this time? I
don't see it happening under Kemi Badenoch, personally. Although, if you have disaffected Conservative voters who are always going to be Conservative at their core, they're going to have to go somewhere. And if Reform continues to follow the Trumpian playbook, you might see some returning, but I just don't think Kemi Badenoch has it to bring people home.
The one reason they could come back is if Reform UK starts to slide, because that means the Tories don't have to keep chasing them down a right-wing direction, and they move back towards the centre.
A perfect summary of the week. Thank you both very, very much indeed. Just quickly before I go, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, will be taking your calls on LBC tomorrow from 10 a.m. If you'd like to put a question to him and your name is not Donald Trump, please send it to sadiq@lbc.co.uk along with your name, your location and phone number so we can contact you. That's sadiq@lbc.co.uk. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on both Global Player and the LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the latest news and opinion. You can put your news categories in the order you want them. You can pause, you can rewind live radio, and you can listen to a range of podcasts. So download the official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at 10 on LBC, it's Ben Kentish. But right now, it's time for Ian Dale.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Well, Keir Starmer will reportedly skip this year's COP climate summit in Brazil, having slammed Rishi Sunak for considering doing this. Is he taking climate change seriously enough? 3 years ago, Rishi Sunak was slammed by the Liberal Democrats for not attending the conference.
A Prime Minister should be going to COP. He needs to show leadership. This is a hugely important issue, climate change. If I was Prime Minister, I would be going. It's an absolute failure of leadership.
Are you angry at the hypocrisy, or do you think he should have other priorities than the climate now? After 8, we'll be trying to tackle